Every once in a while, a game comes along that just feels like it was made with a little extra love. I'm talking about those games that are a satisfying experience across the board. The look, the sound, the feel, the flow, everything just sort of seems to click. That clicking feeling is the sign of a well-polished game. And even though nearly every one of us can identify when a game pulls off this feeling, it's hard to provide tangible examples of how they do it. And that's kind of the point. A polished game shouldn't feel like anything in particular is sticking out, it should just feel right. But just like any other product, service, or creation, there are boxes that game developers can check to ensure for a more polished experience. So what does the word polish refer to in general? Well, you can physically polish something, like your shoes or your car, the purpose of making them look nicer, cleaner, and more professional, and perhaps to help prevent imperfections from popping up in the future. That definitely starts to put us on the right track. In entertainment mediums, the word can take on some different meanings. A polished writer is likely someone who has a firm grasp on the flow of words and the relationships between each sentence and each paragraph. In other words, something they write reads well.
Fire! Madness! Murlocs!
A polished song is oftentimes one that sounds well produced, professionally mixed, and written with a clear focus. Each track, instrument, and sound fulfills its particular role in the song without overpowering the other components. But video games are unique in that they combine so many of those pieces we see in other mediums, and they have the added factor of providing player interaction. Nearly every game requires some combination of visual, audio, and interactive components, so creating a game becomes an interconnected puzzle of tweaking systems and moving parts to fit together as a whole. Because of this extra layer of complexity, video games are an incredibly hard medium to refine. So polish in games specifically is the result of all these interconnected systems coming together into one satisfying experience. And to me, there are 4 parts factor into achieving this result. First, the game must have a consistent direction and design in the aesthetic, the audio, and the interfaces. Second, the game has to feel good and have tangible weight to your actions. Third, there should be a core gameplay mechanic that is focused and perfected as best as possible. These 3 components all work together interactively, and you'll see influences from each one having an impact on the others. The last factor is an overall attention to detail that is applied to all 3 of the previous pieces. It's taking the extra step, adding the love, and doing the little things. Achieve those 4 things, and more often than not, you will have a refined experience. So let's take a look at some examples of how developers have implemented each one of these factors into their games. First, consistent design. This is a result of every audio and visual system in the game working together in harmony to create a package that feels tight-knit, organic, and purposeful. Some games manage to nail every aspect of this. In Arcane Studios' Prey, everything in the game was made with a purpose to make you feel like you really are exploring a vast facility isolated in space with something gone wrong. The art design matches the world created through the game's narrative. The eerie soundtrack drops you directly into the atmosphere the developers were looking to create. Terrifying sound effects remind you of the alien danger you constantly face. Nothing feels out of place. There's just remarkable consistency here. Even the loading screens in this game look cool, and were obviously designed with the intent to fit the game's mood and aesthetic. Studio MDHR's fantastically designed Cuphead is another winner in this category. In fact, Cuphead is a game that does art direction and sound design so well, sometimes you actually forget how incredible it is because everything just looks, sounds, and feels exactly the way it should. The developers had a clear vision of how they wanted the game to present itself, and all the little details they managed to put together result in that exact vision. It's as if every little piece was designed the way it was because it just couldn't be any other way. In both these games, the design direction is clear, consistent, and never wavers from the intended concept. As demonstrated with Prey, however, it's not just enough to have quality gameplay graphics and audio to meet this requirement. The polish has to carry over to things like menus, HUDs, and title screens as well. In Destiny 2, the options you're given, or not given, in creating your character are underwhelming, some would say. But the actual act of moving through this process is incredibly refined. The menu is so clean with its simple white background and your character floating to the left of the screen. There's tangible movement and a satisfying clicking sound as you move through each of your options. It just is very obviously the product of a professional studio that put a lot of work into the overall presentation of its title. But this is just one type of aesthetic that works well, and a clean look doesn't have to mean straight-edged and minimal like it does in Destiny.
You'll never see it come back.
Enter Persona 5, one of the most undeniably stylish games of our generation, which I can't show past the title screen because Atlus is crazy about recording their games. This game's menu systems are just in your face and all over the place, yet the developers managed to grab that style and steer into it so well that it all fits together perfectly. It feels good to maneuver through, and despite its flashiness, it never feels like a distraction. And that's important. I feel like 9 out of 10 other developers would have messed this up and allowed the bombastic style to get in its own way. But in Persona 5, not only does it work, it's one of the stars of the game's design. The second pillar of a well-polished game is that it has to feel good to play and have tangible weight to your actions. So what does that mean exactly? Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit made an excellent video on the idea of game feel and does a great job explaining how developers achieve it, so I definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't already. To me, the feel of a game boils down to this. Are your inputs as a player replicated in-game in a way that provides feedback and feels satisfying? So whether you're using a controller, a keyboard and mouse, or some other peripheral, does that connection from the point you press a button to what shows up on screen feel impactful? If the answer is no, it's likely the game you're playing feels a little empty, weightless, or lacking juice. If the answer is heck yeah, that developer has done a good job polishing the game feel. The most easily relatable examples of this concept are in action games, where things are often meant to feel explosive and over the top. Good action games hit you with visual and audio feedback every turn you take. Like in Doom, which makes a living off of in-your-face feedback. A single battle here will hit you with grenade explosions that tear groups of enemies into multiple pieces, weapons that recoil enough to make you feel like you're really firing them, but never so much that it detracts from the speed of the gameplay, bright color projectiles that you need to bob and weave between, constant screams and groans from the enemies surrounding you, and of course, the glory kills, Doom's stylish and gory method for finishing off a damaged enemy. The game does an outstanding job making the player feel like they're the character on screen. But games don't have to be action-packed or fast-paced to have this feeling. In Hearthstone, every action you make feels impactful. As you scroll through your cards, they jump out of your deck ready to make a move. When you select a card to play, it slams down onto the screen and announces its arrival. Like literally, every card has a voice line that's triggered each time it's played. When you attack with a card, it jumps up and smashes into its target, resulting in a collision that the game makes you feel with each hit. There's even this constant feedback as you mouse over the menu screen buttons or select different options. I mean, this is a card game we're talking about, and it delivers some of the best feel I've experienced regardless of genre, to the point where sometimes it almost feels like too much stimulation. But the use of input feedback in Hearthstone worked so well that nearly every card game since has tried to replicate its game feel in some way. The third component that a game needs in order to feel polished is a core gameplay mechanic that is focused and perfected as best as can be. In other words, whatever it is that you spend most of the game doing, that feature needs to be nailed down. Most games in the Legend of Zelda series are great at this. When you pick up a Zelda game, you know exactly how the controls, the movement, and the swordplay are all going to feel. They're always responsive, your character Link is agile without feeling spazzy, and he's smooth without feeling floaty. And since simply running around and exploring, then fighting the occasional enemy is what you're going to be doing for most of your time with the game, it makes the entire package feel polished. In the 2D realm, Celeste is one of the current champions of focused gameplay mechanics. Jump, dash, and climb. That's pretty much the extent of your skill set in this game. But each one is so well balanced and they interact with each other so fluidly that it makes for some of the tightest controls you can find in a platformer. And while the game does a great job of introducing variety as you progress through it, that core platforming mechanic is what the entire game is built around. Without it, Celeste would fall far from the critically acclaimed game that it is. So we have our three main components to making a polished gaming experience, but we're not quite done. The last piece we need is a demanding attention to detail applied to all three of these aforementioned layers. These are the details that can drive a good game design to be exceptional and may be the most difficult to identify. In Prey, one of these details comes in the form of the notifications that pop up when you complete an objective. It's a clean visual on screen accompanied by a sound effect that simultaneously fits the game's sci-fi theme and its horror theme at the same time. It somehow turns a simple notification into something that makes you feel good for accomplishing an objective, but also a little uneasy about what's to come next. In Naughty Dog's character-driven adventure The Last of Us, you'll find attention to detail in the micro-interactions between Joel and Ellie that take place in real time as you progress through the game. These conversations didn't need to be there, the game would have functioned exactly the same without them, but they were a small touch that made a tremendous impact on the realistic relationship developed between the two characters.
Teamwork.
And in Hearthstone, Blizzard does an excellent job not just at providing audiovisual feedback, but at differentiating the impact of this feedback depending on the movement used. So a fire blast feels less powerful than a fireball, which feels less powerful still than a pyroblast. Any one of these developers could have phoned it in on these seemingly small touches, but instead they chose to add a little more polish to their games by putting in the extra work. And as is the case in all of these games, those little bits of extra effort add up to something much greater. So there's your formula to creating a polished gaming experience. Simple, right? This is a fascinating topic that contains literal hundreds of examples of how game developers implement these ideas. So I'd love to hear what your favorite cases of game polish are and how they affected your experience with the game. And the next time you play a game that fires on all cylinders in this way, I hope you can take a moment to stop and appreciate the effort the developers put into that experience for you. And then go right back to curb stomping demons.
I have a few medical jokes, but I'm afraid you won't find them humorous.